Calculating the price of bonds. First, let's talk about what bonds are. Most individual investors think of bonds as investments, but technically bonds are loans. A bond is actually a loan contract. The person who purchases the bond is technically lending money to either a government organization or a large company. The government agency or the company that issues or sells the bond is technically the borrower. And what occurs is over time the borrower or the company or government will actually pay all that money back. Some of the variables that you need to be aware of, or terminologies, are first, face value, sometimes known as par value. This relates to basically the amount of the bond or the amount that's being borrowed. It's the principal amount. And this is what you'll be paid back at the end of the bond's term. Bonds all have maturity dates. This is the date on which the bond contract ends, and that's the date on which you would receive the face value or the loan amount of the bond back if you were the one that owns the bond contract. There's something called yield. It has lots of different synonyms. Some of the more common ones are yield to maturity, required rate of return, or market rate. What these things basically mean is what is the kind of expected or required rate of return on the bond in today's marketplace. This is the number that will be used when we do our time value of money calculations with the bonds, and we use it as a discount rate to calculate present values. Most bonds, although not all, come with something called a coupon rate. The coupon rate basically tells you what percent of the face value you're going to receive every year as an interest payment. Usually, the coupon rate is expressed in annual terms, but payments are actually made like semi-annually is very common. They might be made annually or quarterly, etc. So the way this works is someone buys a bond by paying money up front for the bond contract, and then over time that person receives interest payments. Let's say you receive an interest payment every year, and then at the end of the maturity time period, when the bond expires, you would get back the face value amount of the bond. So the question is, how much does a bond cost? Or how would you calculate the price of the bond? And it's very, very simple to calculate. Bond pricing is not difficult. All you do is you identify that there are actually two cash flow streams that are associated with a bond. If you buy a bond, most of the time, here's what you're going to receive. You're going to receive a series of coupon interest payments every year, and you're also going to receive the face value at the end. So to figure out the price of the bond, you just figure out the present value of both of those two cash flow streams and add them together. That's all you have to do. The only trick is to make sure that you use this thing called the yield, or the yield to maturity, or the market rate as your actual discount interest rate when you do the present value calculation. It turns out that if the yield, or in other words what the market requires, is less than the coupon rate, or what the bond is actually paying, then the marketplace is usually willing to pay a higher price for the bond than its actual face value. And so in that example, we would say that the bond is trading at a premium to face value. In this example, we have a bond which actually pays 6% of the face value. That's the coupon rate. But the market says, hey, I really only need to earn 4% on this bond because of how the market feels about the bond from a risk standpoint and a couple of other things. So the buyer might actually be willing to pay a higher price, or the market might actually drive the price of this bond up because they feel so good about it, and they only need to earn 4% on it. So we would say in this case that the bond is actually trading at a premium, or the price is actually higher than face value. The reverse is also true. If the market in this example, says I've got to earn 8% on this bond, otherwise I'm not comfortable with it. But the bond only pays 6% of face value, then the only way to compensate is we have to drop the price. So when you go to buy the bond, the price will be less than the face value, and you'll still collect the 6% coupon payments, but those will wind up equaling an 8% return to you because you paid less at the beginning. This is called trading at a discount. So how do you calculate the price of a bond? It's pretty simple. What you're going to do, whether you're using a calculator or an Excel spreadsheet, is you're going to enter the face value as a future value amount. Remember, that's the amount of money you're going to get at the end. Okay? You're going to use the coupon rate to figure out how much money you're going to receive every year in the form of interest. And you're going to enter that amount as a payment. And a hint for you, at that point, you should probably set that interest rate aside and plan not to use it anymore. Make sure that both the future value and the payment, which represent the two cash flow streams that you're going to receive, have the same mathematical sign or symbol on them. So make sure that they're both positive or both negative so that they're together. Then you're just going to enter the yield as the interest rate, and you're going to enter the number of time periods and just solve for present value, and that will give you the bond price. It's very simple. You're just solving for two cash flow streams together and looking at present value. Word of warning, many bonds are actually pay their interest on a semi-annual basis or twice a year. So if that's the case, just make the appropriate adjustments. That would mean that you would divide the payment amount in half, right? Because you're receiving half as much interest twice a year. You divide the yield, or the rate that you're using to calculate the present values. You divide the yield by half, and you'll make sure that the number of time periods matches the number of interest payments. So just go through just methodically and make sure that you've adjusted everything for 2 payments per year, and then that will give you the price of a bond that pays semi-annual interest. If you need to solve for the bond's yield, put everything in and just solve for interest rate. And so you can use the rate function in Excel to do that. You could use the interest function in a calculator to do that. Some financial calculators have specific functions built in that are to solve bond-related calculations. They're really just using time value of money, so you're welcome to just use time value of money if you would like to. Same in Excel. There are actually functions in there called price and yield, which are very specific to calculating things for bonds. If you want to become familiar with those, you can. But it's just as simple to use present value to solve for a bond price and to use rate to solve for the yield on a bond. Here's an example of a bond pricing problem. We have a face value of $10,000, so you put that in as a future value. We have a coupon rate of 10%. That just means you're going to receive 10% of the face value every year. So that means that you're going to have a payment equal to $1,000. So that's what we do with that number. This particular bond we're assuming pays interest just once a year. Maturity date is 10 years. That becomes your number of time periods. And the yield is 8%. In other words, that's what the market is saying they really need to earn on this bond. And that's what we're going to use as the interest rate or the discount rate when we calculate the present value. So the present value of all of the coupon payments and the present value of the face amount together wind up equaling $11,341, and that becomes the price of the bond. So you'd pay $11,341 for this bond today, and you would earn 8% return on that, even though the bond actually pays 10% of its face value. Because you paid higher than the 10%, you paid a premium, you're going to wind up earning just the yield, which is the 8%. Try this one. See if you can solve this one yourself. You can push pause if you need to. Has a face value of $10,000, so that will go in as a future value. Has a yield of 9%, that will go in as your interest rate. Coupon rate of 8% tells us that you'll receive $800 a year as a payment. So you put in a payment of 800, and number of time periods is 17. You should be able to solve for present value and get the answer that's here on the screen. Here's an example for you to work through that has semi-annual payments. So we're told that there's going to be 10 years. The face value is $10,000. The coupon rate is 9%, but that's the stated annual rate. And those payments are going to occur semi-annually, so you're actually going to have 2 payments a year, which will represent half of the annual amount. And the yield is 8%. So the way you'd put this in is number of time periods is 20, because there's going to be 20 payments. The payment winds up being $450, which is half of the $900 you're going to get every year, because you're going to get 2 payments a year. The interest rate you're going to use to do the discounting here, or the present value calculation, is an 8% yield, so we'll divide that in half and use 4%, because it occurs twice a year. And for future value, we'll put in $10,000, which is the face value. When we solve for present value, you should wind up with $10,679. Here's another example. I'll let you press pause and work this one out for yourself. This one also has semi-annual payments, so be aware that you're going to need to make some adjustments, and those adjustments are noted at the bottom of the screen. One thing to note about bond prices is that they do fluctuate, and they fluctuate based on expectations for changes in interest rates and inflation and other factors in the marketplace. Usually, if we expect that inflation and interest rates are going to be going up, bond prices will drop, because an increase in inflation and other factors tends to drive yields up, and if the yield goes up, the bond price goes down. There's an inverse relationship. Bonds are rated. The principal rating agencies out there are Moody's and Standard & Poor's. They rate bonds based on a company or a government agency's ability to pay the interest and ability to pay back the principal at the end. So highly rated bonds, as a general rule, usually have lower yields because there's less risk. And then the reverse is true. Some common issuers of bonds are government agencies. The United States Federal Treasury issues bonds. They issue a large number of bonds in a wide variety of denominations. Interesting thing about that is they're usually, in most states, exempt from state income tax. There's something called municipal bonds, which are bonds that are issued by state and local governments. And one of the interesting characteristics about municipal bonds is that in many cases they are exempt from federal income tax. And that makes them very attractive to a lot of investors because they're called tax-free investments. There's another form of a bond called a zero coupon bond. This is one where there's no coupon rate and they don't pay you interest every year. What you do is you just pay a low amount to buy the bond today, and in some number of years in the future they give you the face value back. And the difference in the price that you pay today and what you get back later equals the interest that you earn. That's called a zero coupon or a no coupon bond.